People generally think about Forbes as a brand. They think about a business publication, top billionaires. A lot of times people don't really think about Forbes as a lifestyle brand.
This type of content, like product recommendations from trusted sources, are going to be more important than ever, actually.
40% of Gen Z using YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram for their product recommendations. Is that how do we, make sure that we have content on those platforms?
It's like we're trying to leverage AI where we can take advantage of efficiency gains, but do so in sort of like a brand safe way.
Premium journalism is forever going to be rooted in human journalism, like trusted, credible, human-led journalism. The content that we create needs to be driven by humans.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Brilliant Commerce Podcast, where I have an opportunity to sit down with some of the brightest minds behind iconic brands, or as I like to say, next to be iconic brands. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Emily Jackson, who's the Senior Vice President of E-commerce at Forbes. Emily, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brian.
We talked about this in kind of the warm up. Traditionally, sitting in this seat would be an operator or a technologist who's behind a sort of a well-known consumer brand. And I like to refer to those as iconic brands. But Forbes definitely, for me, checks the box as an iconic brand. And where you were before, too, at Condé, I think you've had an opportunity to work at some incredible brands, but that most people wouldn't necessarily think of as a traditional consumer brand. So as we think about, I would love for you to help me sort of situate what it means to be in e-commerce at a publisher or at a brand like at Forbes. So maybe let's start there, set the table for us.
Yeah, so obviously Forbes is incredibly well-known brand all the way back to its print days. Forbes is actually over 100 years old. So,
Wow.
Just so much time in this space. And while I feel like people generally think about Forbes as a brand, they think about a business publication. Obviously, we're incredibly well-known for our lists. So that is 30 under 30. It is the top billionaires. We have 50 over 50, a lot of entrepreneurship, a lot of business, some politics thrown in there. A lot of times people don't really think about Forbes as a lifestyle brand, but lifestyle has been running in the veins of Forbes, since back in the day, in the 1990s. But we started off having kind of a lifestyle section within the print magazine, and then that really expanded into digital. And so having Forbes Vetted, which is our product recommendation arm of Forbes, has just been kind of an incredibly natural kind of completion for Forbes as a brand. I think, as you think about lifestyle and how we have delivered lifestyle over the years, we have been kind of delivering this idea of lifestyle tailored towards, more affluent, how you spend wealth. But as we've kind of entered into this era, there is a real need for kind of these, trusted and trusted product recommendations coming from a space of authority. And one of my favorite things about Forbes is that, every single year there is a survey that goes out and it gets published, and it talks about what, the US consumer, kind of how they plot the most trusted publications across the US. And Forbes is consistently in the top 5. We know that people trust Forbes, trust their point of view. So really, when we thought about launching Forbes Vetted, and we launched that in early 2020, we really wanted to make sure that we could kind of combine those two things. So we wanted to make sure that people could continue to trust us through these product recommendations. We knew we kind of had the authority in the space, and that it was a natural extension of our lifestyle coverage. And that's really how kind of Forbes Vetted was born. So, we have a large team of editors and writers who are tasked with extensive research, deep reporting, or hands-on testing of products in order to recommend products in kind of any given category for consumers. And you're really going to see that, across multiple different, not only categories, but also the way that we slice and dice that content. So yes, we are going to go out and we are going to test, the best espresso machines because everybody needs, coffee. But also we are going to think about, what is it that today's visionaries and tomorrow's leaders are really using in order to live their most successful lives. And that's really how we kind of think about plugging our editorial team into their mission, which is that this idea of, trusted product recommendations for living your most successful life. So that's kind of a little bit of a background of how we ended up, with this commerce arm within a traditional media publication like Forbes.
Yeah, no, I think it's fascinating. And it just goes to show just how wide the aperture for commerce actually is and sort of and what defines it. I think about a traditional approach to e-commerce, let's say, it's sort of identifying who your audience is and figuring out what channels they're going to be on and how do I recruit them into what we're building, and then how do I keep them engaged in that journey throughout. That's sort of that framework that still applies, I would say, to the work that you all are doing at Forbes with Vetted.
Yes. And I think, when you think about the content that we're creating, the idea around the content is to build that audience and to build that authority. Like that really is the foundation of every commerce team, or at least it should be. It's how we thought about building commerce at Condé Nast. It's certainly how we think about building commerce at Forbes. This idea of the content needs to be created for the audience. It needs to meet the audience on their platforms that they're on. And it also needs to nurture them down a conversion funnel too. Some of the content that we are creating is going to meet people at the bottom of the funnel. These are going to be kind of our tested best lists. For a long time, people were going to organic search, usually Google, and, looking for something like best Bluetooth headphones. We would have a roundup of, the best Bluetooth headphones that we had tested. And so kind of capturing people where they are fairly high intent, they are high converting, they're, lower funnel. But we also do a lot of content, whether it be, product launches or introductions to new brands. These are introducing our audience to new products. And it is more about kind of bringing those people down the funnel to the point of conversion. So very similar echoes to just kind of the traditional kind of e-commerce operating practice too.
Yeah, I mean, so how I'm super curious here, like as I think about the behaviors that power shopping. So we think like sort of 40 years ago, or maybe even more recently than that, you'd go into a store and you'd likely walk into a store of a brand you ultimately trust, and then you establish a relationship with the associate there that is trying to meet you where you are and understand your needs. And you can sort of say, what's the best version of this that's in the store now? And as I fast forward to today, and I put myself in this category as well, when I search for something like, what is the best headphone? Or I'm looking for a certain review. And I'll be honest, I think sometimes it's difficult for me to understand, or the time it takes to cut through the noise of like, well, the first 5 results that are being returned to me, this doesn't feel authentic. I don't trust this necessarily. And it takes a while for me to get to a place where like, oh, actually, here's an article by a reviewer that I actually want to unpack. And they've spent 6 months with this thing, and I can ultimately trust them. And then I think that can be balanced by this whole movement towards influencers who are creating some of their own content. But now the same sort of dilemma appears there. Like, is this a source that I can actually trust? Is this authentic? Or is this someone who's just being paid to say a certain thing? And sort of, how do I cut through that noise? And I would imagine this is somewhere where a platform with the credibility that Forbes has, that can help you with that authenticity. But just be curious, like, how have you stayed on top of that? How has the sort of the introduction of the AI summaries, as an example, on top of search, how does that impact the role that you're trying to play in this space and to sort of, remain at the top of that authority trust tree?
I think it's a really good question, because right now, and even if you look at a moment in time, 3-4 years ago, there was still a lot of white noise, a lot of people doing product recommendations. And I do think, being Forbes, like, we did have that built-in credibility, but it is something that we do not take lightly. And I think we have put in a lot of time and energy and effort to make sure that that we can kind of continue to show users that we are trustworthy, and B, that we do a good job of communicating why that is. And so one of the things that we really try and do well is talking through, how a product is tested, how we have come to recommend it. And then even in just the operations of our team setup, I mean, there is a a very distinct line between kind of our content team and then our business team who are out cutting the deals, that is going to drive the monetization of this. Most commerce publishers will tell you the same thing. And I think it's really important to make sure that you have a team of editors and writers who are recommending products, regardless of what that monetization opportunity is. First and foremost, is the product good quality? Is it going to stand up to the test of time? Is it a good match for our audience in terms of what we think they're looking for? Even if we can't monetize that, we are still going to feature it as that best product.
Right.
And that is something that we have to continuously stand behind again and again and again in order to make sure that we can kind of continue to keep hold of that authority. I think to your point about kind of how influencers have picked up on this and how, they are now doing product reviews and recommending products, it really ties in with this overall shift of how different generations are, searching for and then getting product recommendations online and even offline. To your point, if you think 10 years ago, how someone would walk into a store, then it was kind of the millennial generation. They were very much focused on, okay, we go to Google search, we search for this product, we get a product recommendation. And now, Gen Zs, it's very, very different. I think such a good stat was 40% of Gen Z are using YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram for their product recommendations. And that is just a massive, massive shift from the way that I think a lot of publishers have been thinking about creating this content. And it's certainly an area that we are investing in, is that how do we make sure that we have content on those platforms that is still trusted, that is still credible, that we can still show the work that we're doing behind the scenes in terms of the testing and the research and the reporting, but for a different generation who want to consume content on a different platform.
Yeah. I think that's super fascinating. And it's a good lesson for an awful lot of brands too. It's you can be sort of stuck and wedded to channels that have worked for you sort of 5 years ago, even though the writing's on the wall that maybe those channels aren't going to perform the right way or that your audience is shifting. And so, and that's also, I would imagine, the advantage of having the brand credibility like Forbes is that I would assume it makes it easier for you to explore channel diversification or, show up in this way that is authentic. But yeah, I'd be curious because I think this would be a good lesson for anyone in consumer. How do you stay on top of that? How do you figure out what are the right channels? How do you say yes to some channels and no to other channels, given this evolution that you described in terms of audiences?
Yeah. Well, I think about it in two ways. The first is, what are the platforms that are going to drive audience? And then secondly, we also have to think about the monetization element of this. What are the platforms that are going to give us monetization opportunities? And I think, the first thing is to make sure that we are on the platforms where we feel like we can do a good job of building audience and nurturing audience. And for that is just a lot of testing because, again, historically, we've had this idea of how do we create content specifically for on-site? People come to us, we're monetizing it through affiliate, we're monetizing it through ads. Now we're saying, okay, if people are going to TikTok or Instagram or even YouTube, or they want to interact with you, they want to have a more personal relationship with you within a newsletter, the content that we create for those platforms is wildly different to the content that we would have created in order to show up, in the SERPs. And so the kind of repackaging and reformatting of that content has been a big shift for us that we've really had to figure out over the past year. What are we putting in a newsletter? It can't just be a repackaging of what we would create to, show up in the SERPs. The second side of it is really the monetization opportunity. And that, I think, we have to look a lot more holistically about monetization than we did before. If you had asked me, 4 or 5 years ago, our primary source of monetization was affiliate commissions. And I think over time, as we've had to shift to different platforms and as our audience has got wider and as we've created content that is further up the funnel, that monetization mix has changed drastically. We do some branded content. We also monetize, from a display perspective. We're trying to monetize on video. There are ads and newsletters. And so really thinking a little bit more, I guess, strategically about what platforms also give us monetization opportunities outside of affiliate commissions, because the affiliate industry is built on this last click model, and that doesn't do incredibly well on social platforms. Like that is not the way people generally interact. Yes, you can have, LTK and Shop My, and I think, a lot of influencers are able to leverage that, but it doesn't convert as well as just kind of like you are on a site, you click off to a link, you are the last click, you get the affiliate commissions. And so it's kind of breaking the entire system a little bit.
Yeah. Attribution is such a hot button topic for us. We work so hard on our attribution models and always trying to give more and more visibility into attribution. But I think the more channels that we're seeing, the reality is like there's no one model that is going to give you like a true picture of attribution. And I imagine that's a pretty interesting challenge for what you all are working on at Forbes. Yeah. So I'd love to sort of like talk about attribution and how you're thinking about it and how you've seen that change over time. And so I'd imagine there's like opportunities, but some things there that sort of are keeping you up at night. Yeah, maybe we'll go there.
One of the most interesting things about the attribution side of it is that I think primarily publishers in the commerce content space have been kind of pegged as this like bottom of the funnel, like they have done well from a last click attribution perspective. And so that generally has been like where we've been able to monetize. As the kind of ecosystem changes a little bit and you have, different platforms, you have different categories, and that is really, I think, elongating the consideration part of the journey for consumers too. Because you may see something on social or like you may interact with a piece of content that is further up the funnel. Forbes as a brand may still be influencing you to buy that product, but the conversion is not happening immediately. And so you're not having that last click. And so I can definitely see a world in which publishers are now able to, at least publishers who are doing commerce content, are trying to access more of those kind of like branding and influence and awareness budgets, because that is still a massive part of the value that we bring to the table instead of just this kind of last click. Yes, we're driving this person to convert. And I think that has been kind of a slow churn. And I don't think we're even quite there in terms of how those dollars are kind of being divided between, top of funnel and bottom of funnel. But it is definitely something that we are having many conversations with advertisers about in terms of what does it look like to create a campaign for you that is more focused on branding and awareness, also knowing that we can do the bottom of the funnel too. So a little bit just more of a full funnel approach.
Yeah, I'd love to be I'd love to be a fly on the wall for some of those conversations with advertisers, because I think one of the issues with last click attribution has been, like it creates sometimes an adversarial relationship. Like everyone wants to claim credit for the order. And I think because it is more and more difficult to ascribe 100% attribution to something, or there's a longer consideration cycle. Let's say you're focusing on what is the best AR headset, and these things are like a $2,000 purchase. It's not going to be, I saw an ad and I just clicked. It's no, I read something, I'm thinking about it. I maybe watched a video, I came back and I read something else. It might take me a week or two to decide that I'm either going to buy or I'm not going to buy. And the content that you're creating and that is going to, I would imagine, influence that purchase to some degree. And I would hope that advertisers are increasingly becoming open-minded to where they're spending money, and they're thinking about their ROI differently, because it'd be a real shame to turn off a channel because you didn't get that last click attribution and be like, well, I turned off that channel because the data told me to, but now suddenly my revenue has dropped. And it's like, well, we have to consider that whole picture, even if the picture isn't giving us the same signal that performance marketers maybe have become accustomed to over the last like 5 or 10 years. Like I need for it to be pixel perfect. And you're like, well, we can't make it pixel perfect. That doesn't mean we're not delivering value to you. So I'd be curious what sort of, not tricks, but how has the narrative within Forbes evolved over time to continue to meet those advertisers, to bring them along, or maybe to sort of evangelize this approach to a more holistic view of where they're spending their marketing dollars?
Yeah, I think it really starts with our audience. Because over the years that we have been in operation, we have built up an audience that now, is generally in market for shopping, who comes to us for product recommendations. And I think that is such a value to advertisers as we speak about them. And then if you take kind of the broader ecosystem of the Forbes audience, you have a lot of, influential people, people with high household income, high net worths. And, one of the things that we're really trying to work on with advertisers is what does it look like to kind of bring commerce into other spaces outside of just, pure commerce content? So a good example of this is what does it look like to do, commerce-led activations at some of our live events? We have a massive live events business. And that is somewhere where, we have very deep knowledge into who that audience is and what type of people that they are. And that can really match well with the types of advertisers that we're talking about who want to get products into the hands of those people, who want to get kind of activations in front of those people. And it's another way for us to think about, still staying core to, our methodology and kind of our value, which is around trusted product recommendations, but taking it kind of offline or in different directions outside of just this kind of well-packaged, tested best list that people are going to find, via organic search. And initial conversations with advertisers, they've been excited about this opportunity. I think it is going to take some reimagining of kind of how that attribution works, because historically, when you work with performance marketers, their first question is like, well, how do we track this?
Yeah.
Sometimes that is not as easy to do. So I think there are always going to be elements of a campaign that we will think about, okay, this is an area where we can directly track, attribution. And there are other areas that we do have to rely back on that kind of branding and influence and awareness that is going to, fill in the top of the funnel, which is still incredibly important for, e-commerce brands.
It brings it back to trust in a funny way, which is where we got started. There's what do your readers trust Forbes because you've been around for 100 years and you are this trusted voice in the space? But when you're talking to advertisers, not that you're going to be hand wavy about it and say, actually, you can't track it, but trust us. But you kind of have the credibility to say, we're going to do the best we can to deliver ROI to you in a way that you can measure. But you have to understand the following things. This is an investment. It's not like an out of home campaign, but it's in some ways it's becoming like an out of home campaign. So how do you think about those blended marketing dollars? Yeah,
well, I also think it's opening up the possibility for us to deliver something that is full funnel. Like before, Forbes Vetted was very focused on, okay, what can we do at the bottom of the funnel? Like, how can it be only performance marketing dollars? But now we actually have the ability to come out the door with something that is full funnel, that people can say, okay, well, we do need branding and awareness over here for this specific product category, but actually we're really focused on shifting products in this specific category over here. How do we blend the two? And I think like that is really exciting for advertisers.
I think it's such a great example too of a obviously iconic and heritage brand like Forbes not being sort of like stuck, like just because you did a certain thing that got you to a certain place doesn't mean that you can't be nimble and act like a startup to some extent and continue to sort of evolve, bring the good parts forward, but also recognizing the opportunities and where the commerce market is going. Speaking of, go ahead, please.
We really do try and kind of ground our coverage too in the core elements of Forbes. Like we want to make sure that when people come and read commerce content on Forbes, that it has a Forbes point of view, that it is connected to this idea of kind of like, the knowledge and the inspiration and the connections that you need to drive success. And so there is going to be, some more of this workhorse content, like the best espresso machines, but successful people, also need espresso machines. And so it really is a mix of both of those. Yeah.
I don't know how to segue into AI, but I'm going to do my best to do it. So let's talk about those best espresso machines. And as I think about, who might be a Forbes reader, is there a year from now, 2 years from now, are these folks who are searching for the best espresso machine to sit on their counter? Are they shopping for themselves, or am I to believe that they're just going to have AI agents that have figured it out for them? What do you think? Even taking your Forbes hat off for a sec. Is that the future that you imagine for consumer?
I will say this. I think the way that people shop is going to fundamentally change. I think we are very much in the early adopter stage of this. And so we're starting to see kind of some ripple effects of how, searches are going to AI answer engines versus the kind of traditional organic search. We're starting to see changes even in terms of how people are interacting with results within Google. So one thing I know for sure, like it will fundamentally change. I do think what still remains is that whether it is you doing the shopping, whether it is an agent doing the shopping, like there is still a need for product recommendations and product recommendations that you can rely on. Like that still needs to be able to fuel the information that people want to capture. How people capture that information and how people interact with that information, I think is going to be, vastly different. And that really is going to be the big challenge, I think, for us and for a lot of publishers in the space is how do we adapt and how do we evolve in this new industry, still delivering on kind of that core message of like, we still want to make sure that we kind of have humans doing hands-on testing of these products and giving, independent reviews and recommendations. Again, how that information gets passed on to a consumer and ultimately how it gets monetized, which is a really key element of this. Like we can't do this for free. How that gets monetized, like that is going to be fundamentally different.
Yeah, the monetization it's a real challenge. Like I asked the question in sort of a cheeky way. Like if I'm shopping for an espresso machine, the last thing in the world that I want is for an agent to do that shopping for me. I am a romantic when it comes to consumer. I like to touch and feel things. I like to get to know brands. I like to become an advocate for those brands once I have discovered something that's new, or maybe I've rediscovered something. But I do think that this content, my view on all of this is that this type of content, like product recommendations from trusted sources, are going to be more important than ever, actually, because I can't imagine a scenario where an agent is maybe making the work for me a little bit easier. It's finding the 10 things that it's like, I actually think you're really going to like this, but then I want to go and do it. And I might sort of allow agents to go and shop for the things that are like unsexy for me, totally fine. But, as a consumer, and if we look at what's fueling the economy, it is consumer. I think it's going to be really difficult to imagine a scenario where like we're suddenly not shopping anymore, or that we've completely trusted agents to do that. But this content, boy, oh boy, to me, like everything that I've seen in the search landscape and how that's changing kind of matters more than ever. And I've always been thinking about it from the point of view of a brand and how they need to shift their strategy for content creation. But the challenges for someone like Forbes thinking about the monetization model, like I can't really wrap my brain around that just yet. So I'm happy to hear that you all are working on it.
I don't think we really know what the future of that is yet. Like there is still so much to be seen in terms of how this plays out, in terms of how, the likes of ChatGPT and Perplexity and all of those different models think about, monetization and how that includes or does not include publishers. We have a long way to go to figure out like a very clear path forward for how to do this.
Yeah. And what is their responsibility in all of this? Like there's monetization, but then there's also like the training that they're doing. And I know that can be somewhat controversial in this moment. The monetization cannot, in my opinion, accrue entirely to them. They're sort of helping to summarize the value, but they're not delivering all of that value. It's sort of an interesting time.
It is.
What about AI that you might be using internally? Is your team or the team at Forbes, if you come across some tools that you're leveraging today that you're finding some unexpected value from, or the other side of that, have you been, recently disappointed by the ineffectiveness, despite all the sizzle of AI? I'd be curious to hear a point of view on either one.
I mean, I would say for me personally, I have continuously been impressed at not only the opportunity that it presents, but also the way that our team has been able to leverage it to help drive efficiency. And that is really how we're thinking about rolling it out across our organization. Especially a really good example of this is we have a great content strategy team. So they are really helping drive, what is it that our audience needs at any given moment? How do the pieces of content fit together? And also, what is working well on different platforms? Remove like all or even any revenue information from that and just think about like the ecosystem of like, how are people engaging with this? Like, is it working? The amount of work that we've been able to do to help speed up analysis and recommendations for things like that with massive swaths of data without going, line by line in a spreadsheet, and really getting, a lot of like thematic recommendations has been incredible. And like that is an area where I could really see us continuing to leverage it and where it brings the most value. So my answer is that I'm impressed, and I think there is a lot more to do. I can see, people's roles being, we're already doing a lot of training around a lot of different tools to see how we can implement them into our workflows. And I think like we are on a very fast rocket ship in terms of what the future of that can be.
Yeah. I'm hearing similar things. And the term efficiency comes up an awful lot. It's not like full transformation, and the way that we worked before is like it's fundamentally different today. It's like, no, we are unlocking an awful lot of efficiency, and it seems like there's an awful lot there that we ultimately want to keep pulling on. And I'm also hearing there's this rocket ship, certainly, but the more, again, iconic heritage brands, the more that they're leveraging AI. What I'm also hearing from leaders is we're trying to be cautious. Like we're trying to leverage AI where we can take advantage of efficiency gains, but do so in sort of like a brand safe way and in a data safe way. And I'd just be curious if those are some of the conversations that you and the team are having at Forbes. Like, yes, something that is super powerful, but how do we make sure that we're leveraging it in a way that is brand accretive for Forbes and trust accretive, as opposed to, we're taking all of these risks to just harness the rocket power.
Yeah. And I think because we've been so focused on efficiency versus anything related to our content, like that is where we are very, very cautious of, we are a premium publication, and premium journalism is forever going to be rooted in human journalism, like trusted, credible, human-led journalism. And that really is at the core of like everything that we do at Forbes and Forbes Vetted. And so that is kind of like the line that we've drawn around like this. We would love to use it all day, every day for like, how do we, do data analysis? How do we help with content strategy? How do we speed up meeting minutes and deck reviews and summaries and all of those things? But the content that we create needs to be driven by humans. And I think, a lot of publishers will say the same thing.
That is a fantastic place to wrap us up. And I'm thrilled that you said that, because I'm 100% in that category. More content is just more content. It's like, I don't want it to be a race to the bottom. I want to read something that really resonates, that I know a human being took the time to test the product and then to give me an honest interpretation about it. And I'm here for efficiency. I'm here for summaries. I'm here for analysis, but I never want to lose that human connection. And I think that's super important in consumer and all things commerce. It's certainly what makes me still excited to work in the space after 30 years. So thanks so much for sharing your perspective. Thanks for being here today. I liked taking this alternative view to commerce from, again, someone who has an opportunity to work behind the scenes at a brand that I have a ton of respect for. So this was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brian.